Welcome. We do have Chris Shipley in the house here, Chief Growth Officer at Legacy Power, father, founder, adrenaline junkie, sports enthusiast, shoe collector. You know, what else do we got to add to the plate?
I think that's plenty for the moment. Plenty to keep me busy.
Well, appreciate you setting aside some time and jumping on with Rosh and I here.
Yeah.
You know, obviously been in the door-to-door scene for going on 16, 17. Can we count that high? What are we at now?
06 was my first summer, so 19 years around the space. Yeah, wow. It's been a minute.
Where was the founding company you were at that kicked everything off?
Yeah, back in 2005, I met with Cody Vabel. And we were at a small monotronics dealer. Okay. It was a group called Federal Alarms. There was like 1-2 offices, super small. That was kind of the foundation. And you know, we quickly pivoted and joined Apex Alarm back in the day. That was for those of you that have been OGs, that's when it went from APEX to APX, which then obviously transitioned to Vivint after a few years. So that's kind of where we cut our teeth. I was out as a normal rep and knocking doors in the alarm days, and that was, trying to go figure out how to build teams and recruit guys and retain them and figure out how to make very small commissions comparatively to what it is today. But I think that's where everybody learned to go figure out how to work and work hard and go put their efforts in the right ways, and it was a fun time, man. That was a core group of guys. I mean, you got Cody Vabel, who has been in the space a long time. You've got guys like Jared Young, who everybody knows is like the bougiest redneck out there. You've got a core group that obviously went and built something special, and obviously there's been a lot of people have done a lot of great things since. So it's fun to watch everybody just go and crush it in their various different directions they've been in.
Yeah, and I think your profile is so interesting. I think Riley read through your entire LinkedIn, probably more than you ever read in a tweet.
Do a little stalking, free podcast. So
yeah, very interesting profile, because usually, like we talked about before, door to door, stay door to door.
Yep.
Door to door, leave door to door, never come back. Door to door, you left door to door, came back.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I do tell people all the time, I'm like, my background tends to be a little different than the average guy that's in this space, and you kind of highlighted it. It's guys that are in it usually just stay in it and just keep cranking. Guys that are in it, exit, they go do something else completely different, for better or for worse. I found that being at Vivint for years was amazing. I decided that I wanted to try to go bet on myself, and I'd done a startup in undergrad. I wanted to go do another startup, but I also realized I was kind of lacking some of my rounded skills to be able to go do that. And so I actually left door to door, went and got an MBA. I swore I would never go work for a big business. I was all about startups. I spent my focus for 2 years working with venture capital and private equity groups as my focus while in grad school. And there I found myself working for Verizon corporate out of Manhattan, out of MBA school. I mean, couldn't be farther from what I thought, because legitimately I was like, startup all the way, something small, something intimate, something that I could really drive an impact on. Then all of a sudden got to, I'm working for a Fortune 15 company in downtown Manhattan. But it had its benefits. It had an opportunity to put me in the driver's seat of a few really unique scenarios that I probably had no business being involved with, but I was fortunate to be able to work on a few projects that were very meaningful. I mean, I was part of a team that executed on why we bought AOL and Yahoo at the time. So we spent $9 billion. Funny enough, Verizon didn't do anything with either of those companies. So I don't know, they probably just wrote it off on a balance sheet somewhere, but
margin error.
It's a rounding error for them, but then I was always intrigued by solar, and I actually almost joined solar 2 different times before getting into it while I was working for Verizon. So I was always intrigued by the industry, loved the upside, loved the value proposition, but just need to find the right scenario that worked for me and what I was looking for long term. And so, I spent 9 months talking with Doug, who's the founder of Legacy, before I actually joined them here. But they were very early on, right? They were barely getting their feet underneath them at that time. And I've been here 8 years with these guys. So, I mean, it's been a minute. It's the longest place I've ever spent in my career, which, I'm like, it's crazy to think about. My first day was actually us moving into this building. So I think Doug hired me truthfully that day so that he could use my truck and trailer to move a bunch of stuff over here. But so that's kind of a funny time. But that's, fast forward now, I'm like 8 years in an industry that's been a lot of ups, a lot of downs, and a lot of in between. And I don't think we're done yet. I think we're going to all have to grip on and hold for the ride, because it's going to be a lot still, I think, coming. But I think all of us need to understand that this is a new industry, still in its infancy comparatively. And so anytime industries are in those situations, that's still going to kind of be what happens. And so hopefully a lot of us are enjoying it and
but then, like you said,
participate in it.
Volatility creates opportunity, right? I think there is a reason why a lot of the companies thrive when a recession happened, or when COVID happened, or when 2008, tons of companies exploded in 2021 after COVID. I think that tons of tech companies, Zoom, or there's a good example of actually Clear. I don't know if you're Clear. I read about that they were about to go bankrupt before 2021. They had no cash. Wow. And 2021 hit. There was one private equity which is like, we'll go double down on you guys. They grew 50x 3 years.
Yeah, it's not shocking, right? You look at, when there's volatility in our country, in our macroeconomics, in a particular industry, there is opportunity that can be found. It's just trying to go figure out what it is and go drive towards it, right? And so, I think that's one of the things that I've learned, as well as a lot of us that have been in the solar industry as a whole, is you got to know how to ride the highs, but also know how to ride the lows and not get too high or too low. And you're just trying to figure out and watch for how can we maintain, but when those opportunities come, when do we pounce on them and just go? And I think solar has seen some of those. I don't think we're done yet. I still think there's a lot of upside in the industry, but it's going to be, this is not an industry that's, going to be one that's fainting for the weary. This is going to be an industry you have to have some thick skin, and you have to be willing to kind of go through some of the bumps. But as you highlighted, Rosh, if you're in a situation like Clear was, where you're kind of up against a wall, which I think solar as a whole has kind of felt that the last little while, there is a silver lining, and there are opportunities for those that find and see those opportunities and can go execute on. And I think we're going to see some of the most powerful, positions of organizations in the next few years with solar, in that growth and in this opportunity that we find ourselves in, for sure.
Yeah. And one thing I want to kind of come back to this real quick. So having experienced in, a Fortune 15 company, working in the big corporate side of things, now coming back into the more door-to-door, the more, rough and rowdy, I'm a sales rep. So coming back into that, you were head of business development, right? Here at Legacy, in charge of growing the partner model.
Yeah, when I first started, it was, hey, how do we go look at additional products and services? Mm-hmm. I think inherently everybody in solar had come from different industries for the most part. Right. And so a lot of them were trying to look and think through, hey, what else could we sell customers? What else could we attach? What could help with attrition rates? All those things have been on the mind of lots of companies for lots of years. And so that's actually what I came in to try to help with initially. It quickly transitioned into, hey, we're building the software company that inherently we're going to go spin out from Legacy, and it's going to go stand up on its own. And probably because of some of my background and because of my love for startups, Doug had approached me and said, hey, do you want to go help get this thing out the gate, get it off the ground, see if it has legs? Can we go grow this business? And I said, well, let's go figure it out, right? So that business, Legacy, was its first client. Fortunate enough. Weird how that works. But at the end of the day, we grew that from never having any sort of client to, I think it was doing probably $1.3 million, $1.4 million in ARR by the time I exited and came back on the solar side. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think for me, what I've learned and found is that solar, for better or for worse, needs a lot of support from a lot of different ways. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you've got to really stay focused on solar if you really want to execute well in this space. Because ultimately, a lot of groups have gotten really diversified in a lot of different ways. And that, unfortunately, I think has cost a lot of people their businesses overall. So one thing we've really tried to focus on is just staying very true to ourselves and staying very hardcore on putting our heads down and going to work in solar. But, the last 3-4 years, we've spent a lot of time around building up our partner network, which I was asked to do when we came back on this side of the table. And we've built that from the ground up once again. There's effectively no partner volume coming in when I was asked to come back, and then ultimately now it represents over 50% of all the volume we do on the install side of our business. So super excited about that. I love that side of our business, but I oversee multiple channels now, which is super fun, and we've got to continue to figure out how to grow, but grow the right way and grow profitably and sustainably. And I think that's going to be the name of the game for the next little while for most solar companies is, hey, how do we be smart about ensuring we have a long-lasting strategy?
Yeah, and you talked about how I think you joined a lot of growing sustainable businesses, and you were part of the journey before they grew, before they were sustainable, including Legacy, right? Like you joined 8 years ago, which is 2 years after Legacy started. Yeah. Why did you decide to take a risk? Coming from the corporate background, having a great position, you're like, what did you see in Legacy saying I can go join the startup and I'm confident I'm going to be able to provide value and still grow this business? What do you look for when you're joining?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I mentioned to you I'd had 2 other looks at other solar opportunities at the time. I think a couple different things. One, you want to look at what's the actual roles, responsibilities, what's the trajectory of the organization, what's going to be the right fit to be able to find the right skill set that I have to be able to go create value, right? And I think a lot of times most people aren't willing to wait or be patient to find the right fit and find the right organization that they align to and can go impact in a meaningful way and drive that value up, right? I think in door-to-door sales, it's very well known that dollars follow value. It's something a lot of us talk about, but at the end of the day, if you think about the value that you have, you've got to be able to internally understand what are your skills that you have, what are your focuses, and how do they align to the organization that you want to be a part of. For me, I knew I didn't want to stay in Fortune 500 America type business settings for the long term. I love visiting Manhattan. I have a wife and kids. I don't really want to go live in Manhattan with my wife and kids every day. So I kind of knew that was something that was a great opportunity for experience and exposure, but ultimately it wasn't where I was going to land, right? And so as you think about solar, I mentioned the value proposition. I'm like, the value proposition is still just as good today as it was years ago when it was really in its infancy as an industry, standing up in 2009, 2012, 2014 when I joined. Consumers have to have power, right? It's a necessity. That's number one. Number two, people care about their pocketbooks, probably now more than ever based on interest rates and inflation and other things we've all dealt with. But at the end of the day, people want optionality, right? They don't want to feel stuck and be in a monopoly. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, those things I kind of identified and realized, hey, there's a great opportunity in this space. Doesn't mean it's perfectly defined. Obviously, we've watched this space evolve over the years, but I saw the writing on the wall that there was a lot of great pieces put together that could go create something special. Now, you couple that with what's happened at Legacy. We've been at this thing 10 years as an organization. I've been here, 8.5 of those 10 years. And ultimately for us, we've gone through our ups and downs. We've had good days. We've had really tough days. We've had days where we thought we were on top of the world, and then the next day we're literally like, is this thing going to actually still be around? And I think the one thing that I have found is that I want to go work around people that I actually enjoy being around, and people I actually believe have the same view on what we're out to accomplish. And that's one of the things I think most people miss on is they don't think enough about who am I spending my time around? Do I align with these people? Do I align with the culture? I'm like, why did somebody work with my office versus somebody else's when we were knocking doors? a lot of it's around culture, right? I think people know Legacy has a very strong culture. It is one where I don't think you find much in between. It's like people love it or they hate it. And I think that's actually a really good thing. Grant Cardone talks about it, like, if you don't have a few haters along the way, you're not doing it right. I'm like, cool. Like, if there's some people that aren't super in love with what we're doing, I'm like, that's great. That means we're doing it right. At the same turn, we've got to continue to build a culture that people want to be around and be aligned with and sustain for the long term of the industry. We need to continue to be a staple. And I don't want that just with our company. I want it from lots of different companies in the whole industry as a whole. It doesn't need to be a one-size-fits-all box for our industry. There's lots of great companies. There's lots of good being done. I think that's got to be a core focus as we look to go and continue to evolve the industry more than anything.
And I think it's very interesting you said that, because I moved to Utah 3 years ago. No idea I was going to live here for 3 years now. Like, I love Utah. It's great. And I spent a lot of time in California and now meeting a lot of people in New York. And I think so commercialized, where everyone has a value. And the value is what market defines their value is. Versus moving into Utah, it's relationships. It's the reputation you build over a course of time. It's the people you know. And I think when you look at great companies, they're not built by skilled people. They're built with people who are building a culture. Because then retention is the biggest key component for any company to really grow and scale. So it's interesting you said that, because I think that is a very unique feature which is existing in Utah market more so all over the country. Why do you think that isn't more in Utah?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, at the end of the day, I think people in Utah, inherently the word entrepreneurship is a part of our culture, right? It's a part of this thriving growth. It's a state, as you think about the state as a whole, it's still in its infancy compared to other places in the country, right? You look at when Massachusetts was established and Washington, D.C. and all the states on the East Coast versus Utah, I'm like, it's the mid-1800s. Like, we're still trying to catch up a little bit, right? And so I think ultimately at the end of the day, there's a lot of people here that really want to put Utah on the map and really do it in a meaningful way. I've watched the tech scene absolutely explode in this space, right? Silicon Slopes.
Yeah.
The fact that we have the ability to go dub ourselves as the next Silicon Valley, that's super cool to me. Crazy. I'm like, I got Adobe across the street here. That's one of their largest campuses. I'm like, they came here because they bought Omniture, and that kind of put the staple in Utah's here. I think people thrive around that. I think they get excited about that. I think they want to be a part of growth and want to be a part of something that is new and it's innovative and it's not been around for 300 years. And, we have the outdoors, right? People love a balance of life in some fashion. I don't know that I love the term work-life balance. I think it's a term that's used a lot that's very tough. I actually heard Jeff Bezos say the other day, he's like, I achieve work-life harmony. I thought that was super cool. The ability to be harmonious between our work and our personal life, if you can find a way to harmonize that, wow, now we're on to something. And I think people in Utah do love that kind of family life outside of work. And so sometimes there is some give and take on both sides that is found here that inherently you have to drive a culture to in order to be able to support. Otherwise, one really overruns the other or vice versa. And I think that's the part that where Utah has found itself from a culture perspective. Like, I think of it like culture is by design or by default. It's either going to happen to us or we're going to go be purposeful and mindful about it. Jeff Mendez, obviously with being a staple to the door-to-door scene, he runs around with the mantra life by design. Very much fits to that culture by design or culture by default perspective, right? And I think that's starting to just be a part of what this ecosystem is, both from the door-to-door sales scene, both from the tech scene. We're seeing that from both sides, but absolutely the culture here is something that's super special and it's tight-knit. And I think that's what keeps people here. I'm not from here either. I plan to come here for college, enjoy skiing while I was in college, and then literally leave here as fast as I could afterwards. That was the plan. And I fell in love with the outdoors. I fell in love with the people. I thought there was a lot of, call it cultural things that I may have to get used to in this state comparatively. And boy, I've been enlightened and enriched by being a part of the culture of Utah, and I truly believe that's a lot of what allows people to, like you, to want to stay here and be a part of it and see it and feel it and experience it. And when we have people come from out of state that aren't from here, they come in, they're like, wow, it's so beautiful here. Wow, people are so nice here. I'm like, yeah, it's nice to live in a place where a lot of people vacation. Yeah. Now I know we're onto something special for the long term.
Oh, yeah. No, sorry. I guess you got to stay here a little bit while longer as we build this thing. But so Chris, I guess talk to me about what you guys are building culture-wise, because obviously Legacy's now 4th largest installer in the nation. Yeah. Whereas 8 years ago, definitely weren't even an installer at that point. So you've been able to watch that growth, build that culture, being, the larger one. I'm sure obviously you get a lot of inbound, get a lot of people wanting to come be part of it. Sure. As with might not have as much of the, I need to go find the people. Yeah. So with that, you have the, people want to come in automatically. Are they the right fit for the culture versus I got to keep the culture and bring the external people inwards? So what's something that you guys like to do to differentiate yourself? Walk me through that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think it first makes me think specifically about our mission statement, right? Our mission statement specifically calls out a part of it that says we want to be the best version of ourselves and help others to do the same. I think that's something that actually has some depth and some meaning to it, right? It's not just something that we throw up on the wall and it's nice to look at and be like, oh yeah, we're trying to do that. That's a part of that culture that I do believe is infectious, and what people do see as a value when looking at a legacy. They want to continue to be the best version of themselves. It takes work, it takes effort, it takes a constant evaluation to say, am I doing this the best of my ability, and can I look myself in the mirror every day and say, am I getting better every day? And in turn, I think at some point you look at it and say, I've gone from being a C player to a B player to an A player, and working on your skills to craft your ability to do that. But they talk a lot about, in recruiting, A's recruit B's, B's recruit C's, C's are effectively not recruiting at that time. And if you think about it, that's part of our strategy at Legacy within our culture is to level up. And we talk a lot about that. We talk about how do we get you from here to there. And we talk about, hey, what are your goals in 5 years and how do we get you to those goals, whether they're at this business or not. We got to figure out a way where this vehicle is better than any other vehicle to take you to your goals and aspirations. When we get into that part of it, we start to really eclipse and understand that that's what drives people to this business. Right? I think transparency, vulnerability, being willing to talk about the good, bad, and the ugly is a part of also what attracts people. People know the Legacy story and have watched us for 10 years. I'm like, they've seen the ups and the downs. And we've had those, and we're clear about those. And there have been good days and bad days. You think about transitioning from being sales only to then being an installer. That's a lot of work in and of itself. Then try to go do that while being privately held, never raising outside capital, to also doing it, what I would argue is the worst financial situation ever in our industry, to go put a bunch of money into a capital intensive side of the organization, right? I'm like, M1 money used to flow like it was like anywhere and everywhere, and it was like, oh, you want an M1? Oh yeah, we'll do that. That's easy, right? Companies in our industry built their companies during those times when it was really simple, and good on them. I think it's also what's forced some of them out of business because they created bad habits. For us, we jumped into this realizing and recognizing that we'd worked with effectively almost all of the large installers in our industry. We knew what worked, what didn't. We knew what was good, what was bad. And so we were able to take that lens and perspective from being one of the largest sales organizations ever in the industry to then saying we can take all that good and go focus it and harness it in the right direction to really go grow that side of the business. And it took a company going out of business on us to force us into that, realizing that we were left holding the liability that we were trying to not pick up by being sales only. But it forced us to move, and it forced us to go reinvent the wheel on who we were and what we were about and where we were going to spend our time, energy, and efforts. 3 years at it, we've gone from never doing an install to the 4th largest installer in America. I love that. I love knowing that we've had to go through a lot of through one of the toughest circumstances on the financial side to get to where we are today. I believe it's actually built us for something really good in the future because we've had to be very disciplined. We've had to keep our heads very, very focused as an organization to be able to say, how are we going to do this sustainably and profitably and actually ensure that we create a customer experience that leaves us highly reviewed like we are. We're one of, if not the highest reviewed solar company in the industry. And that takes work and effort from others, not like myself, like our marketing team that really focus in on that. But you've got to deliver for your customers every day. And ultimately, I believe those are some of the things that we have done differently than others that have gotten us to a place where, 3 years at it, we've grown this monster machine that, we're in 16 states. We're rolling out another 3 or 4 states this year to continue on the growth trajectory. It's allowed us to be in a position where we can grow multiple new sales channels and have opportunities to be able to go in different directions that will be able to continue to support the industry. And we're excited about those things. And obviously myself being over growth for the organization, I'm hyper focused on how do we go do this the right way? How do we go make sure that we're profitable by doing it? But also taking those opportunities when we see them and seeing some of the mess that's being created and saying, I can find the gold in there and let's go exploit that and go really pinpoint how to go make that meaningful. And I truly believe that those that will spend the time looking for those silver linings and those gold nuggets, man, they're going to be off to the races in the next couple of years because there's lots of opportunities right now for sure if you're doing it right.
Yeah. You said something earlier with a lot of businesses try and find this diversification model, right? It's like, oh, cool, I've got this one thing, and then let me try and add this on and add this on and add this on. And, to where you guys are saying we're hyper-focused. We know start to finish what we're looking at, what we're doing. What would your advice be to a younger business owner that, is at that 1 to 5 million range? They're starting to explore growth, but, maybe they're thinking diversification instead of just hyper-focus. What would you say to them?
Yeah, it's a really interesting perspective because for me, I actually am super clear with people when I talk that I don't believe it's just one strategy that wins in this industry. Do I believe that there's actually a strategy where somebody could be in a market and go do multiple products and services and be exceptional at it? 100%. I totally believe that. I also believe that there's organizations and groups that should stay far away from that. And so ultimately at the end of the day, I think what most groups that are in that situation where they're like starting to get some traction, they're excited, they need to be really clear about who they are and what their plan of attack is for what their strategy is. I truly believe if somebody has a plan for the strategy they're driving to, it can be whatever strategy it is. It could be a winning strategy that's far different than ours. I don't think our strategy is the only one that wins. I think there's lots of different strategies, but I will tell people time and time again, execution is the key. Because if you can't execute to your strategy, it won't even matter what the strategy is. You have to be disciplined in your execution of what your strategy really is and hone in on that, right? I can think of organizations off the top of my head that don't have a footprint like Legacy. There's organizations that say, hey, we're going to go do multiple different products and services, but we're going to do it in a tighter geographical scenario, that they're executing well on their strategy and they are profitable and they are making good money. And I love to see that. That's not our strategy. We're executing to a very different strategy. But at the end of the day, where I would bring this back to everyone and where I'd sit somebody down and say, hey, who is more successful, right? Everybody uses this word success. Define success. I could argue that somebody who owns a little surf shop in California who works 3 days a week and he gets to surf every day and he makes a good living for his family, his strategy is very different than the dude running a hedge fund in New York. But who's more successful? I could argue either way in lots of different reasons, but they have very different strategies. So the strategy is the focus, the execution is going to be the delivery, and ultimately at the end of the day, I'm like, the guy who's running a $1 to $5 million company or $10 million company, he may only want to operate in one market, and he may want to offer multiple product offerings to the same customer base. And that can work extremely well, and it can be extremely profitable. But I look at it, do you want to build a lifestyle business? Or do you want to build something completely different than that that's a big behemoth in an industry, right? I could argue that people need to understand what's going to bring them fulfillment, what's going to bring them happiness, what's going to allow their skills to create the most value for the plan that they're trying to execute on. If we can find those things, we can define where they need to go and what they need to do, right? But I love finding the surf shop owners. Those dudes, they love their lives. They're super happy. They couldn't be happier.
That's such an interesting analogy because I feel like it's missing for a lot of people. Like, I think there's a driving factor which keeps you motivated, and then there's the satisfaction factor. But I think if you're doing something but you have no satisfaction and you just don't feel you're content, you're putting all this effort for this exit which doesn't exist. Which is, like you said, I mean, there's a lot of examples of people who are, maybe we think they're successful, but in their head, they're not successful because they're not happy and they're not content.
Yeah, I look at it and I'm like, the door-to-door industry as a whole is striving for that happiness. It's striving for that execution. It's striving for that strategy and that discipline and that execution. All of us are striving for a lot of those different things. I love knowing that not all strategies are the same. I love knowing that all strategies can win if executed appropriately. I love knowing and seeing people that are doing very different things than me, but they are super happy with their lives. You know, there's an individual that I follow that is out of California, and he's a private wealth manager. And he sits in front of some of the most established individuals, most wealthy individuals. He helps them with how they execute on their plans. And ultimately, at the end of the day, he makes the comment that he's like, find me somebody who's successful and show me their family. And then we'll figure out if success is actually truly defined the same way or not. And we'll figure out whether somebody really is happy or not. And we can start to figure out, do you want to be that person or this person? I'm one, for me, where I love spending time with my family. I love spending time with my wife and kids. I love being able to enjoy experiences outside of the office. And at the end of the day, I love seeing people win in this industry when I know they have a good family life. I hate when people have tough lives, right? I'm like, but they chase the money. I'm like, it's not always just about money. Money can be a vehicle to something that can help you alleviate a lot of problems, but at the end of the day, it doesn't solve all problems by any means.
And just speaking of the different strategies, one of the additional things that you're involved in is being an investor, being able to look at a lot of different companies. So I guess talk to me about some of those, some of the different companies that you've looked at, different strategies that you've seen, what's helped you kind of decide, yes, let's go all in on these guys because I see the vision, I see the strategy versus I don't see it as much. Because a lot of people that listen to this are younger business owners. They're either trying to raise capital or they're trying to make an exit. So they're trying to figure out, how do I go get an investor to look at my business? What do I need to do to be successful there?
It's a super good question. I was fortunate enough during my grad school days to go spend some time like out on Sand Hill Road as an example, meeting with some of the most premier VC firms there is in the Bay Area. One of the things that I heard time and time and time again, it was like the common theme across the board. You would find these investors talking about the fact that when they look at a business plan and they're looking at a business, it can look great on paper, but by a majority landslide, investors will tell you they're betting on the jockey before the horse. They're betting on the people, right? People can put whatever they want in a pro forma, 5 years, and I'm going to do this, this, and this, and it's going to be amazing and jump along for the ride. But by and large, investors are looking for, is this person going to be the person that will actually do what they say they're going to do? Is this the team that I believe will actually execute on the strategy that they're delivering on? Right? At the end of the day, the investor is largely going to look at, have we compiled the group of people that can really do this thing together? Right? The other thing I've heard is you think even for early investors or early startups, they talk about founders and they talk about 3 is better than 1, which is better than 2. I've heard that one as well. What they're talking about is your founding team. It's actually better to have 3 minds because you get some diversity in thought. But 3 is better than 1, but 1 is better than 2. 1 being better than 2, meaning, hey, 50-50 partnerships are really tough and you've got to have somebody that drives the decisions and somebody's got to be able to kind of go lead from the front. And so ultimately, if you're in that situation where you're trying to go figure out who's my founding team and how many people are supposed to be on this founding team and how do we go lead the charge in whatever industry you're in, think about that. 3 is better than 1, which is better than 2. And I think if you focused on those couple things and you think through where's my business, what's my industry, investors also want a business obviously that's going to grow and can figure out what based on their thesis. But, you know, Roshan, you've been through it. You've been out raising money from time to time. Not all investors are created equal. Not all investors have their own investment thesis.
Yeah.
They all don't invest in the same things.
Yep.
Some are very focused on certain industries. Some are focused on late stage versus early stage. Some are in software. Some are in tech. Some are in medical devices. Like, that's the one thing I think I had to learn as I did a couple startups is you have to know who you're talking to and what their thesis is along the way. But also I will say, if you ask for money, they give you advice. And if you ask for advice, they give you money. And so that's the other approach I would take is try to go find as many people that are willing to give you advice, because then all of a sudden they come in with, oh, well, like, what if I gave you some money with, like, where can we go with this? I'm fortunate enough to have a wife that's super entrepreneurial. My wife, I'm super proud of her. She built a business all on her own. She was a founder of one. I would like to think that maybe I gave her some help along the way, but my wife exited her company 2 years ago. And we never actually took on investors. We did it 100% on our own. We were fortunate enough to be in a place where we could do that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that's also one of the other things I'd say is know when you actually want investors and when you don't, and when's the right timing of that along the way. That's a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you said that because I can definitely relate to it. I tried to raise capital a year ago, and I went through this process of like just focusing on capital, pitching the company, pitching the idea, and the interest was very different. The analysis was more focused on what's wrong with the business versus we just raised a little bit of capital like a few months ago. I was not trying to raise capital.
Right.
And it was the mindset of investors looking at, like you said, they're betting on the jockey, right? They're like, if the product fails, can this team pivot and launch something else?
Yes.
If this industry collapses, which is happening today in a lot of places, can these guys execute? And that is what Y Combinator does. Y Combinator invests in tons of businesses. Half of them change the product they're building.
For sure.
Right? Because if you have a good team and if you have a good foundation, these guys are there for the long run. They're not going to leave, right? And that's why you said 3 is better than 2 and 1 is better than 2 as well, because 3 founders or 3 cohesive minds, they will work together to keep each other motivated.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's I can definitely relate to all of that, what you said. That's interesting.
The other thing I'll mention just real quick, I was fortunate during grad school, I ran a fund that funded student startups. And it was a fund that was allocated from a bank here locally, which was really nice and kind of that bank to look to support students while they were in school, trying to go help fund their startups. But we had this unique approach where we looked at milestone funding, and we challenged startups to think through what's the next iteration or milestone that you need to hit, and what's that going to do for your business, and help us understand what it's going to take to get to that next milestone. And so what it really tried to drive towards was helping people identify, hey, yes, you want to go get to the end result, but what's what's the next step that's really going to go move the needle in your business? And what does it really take to be able to go get you that next step? Because a lot of times I think people, when they're raising what they believe are bigger chunks of money, when in reality, that's where you get all the advice, because the advice is telling you, hey, you actually just need to do A and B, not A through G, right? And so that would be the other comment I would make, is really challenge founders and organizations that are in that space of 1 to 5 million to start thinking through, what's the next thing that you could go do, that you could spend your money into, that would give you the biggest bang for the buck. Challenging them on what I would think through as opportunity costs. What's the biggest opportunity to be able to go allocate your resources, your people's time, actual dollars? What's going to give you the biggest bang for the buck in return? It's one of the things I feel like we focused on a lot during the startup that I was a part of here. With the software side, it was very much focused on, everybody wants you to do 50 things, but what's the next 1 or 2 things that can deliver the best result? That, I think, is huge for groups, and what investors love investing into is people that are a little bit tighter on how they're thinking through the growth of their business.
Yeah, definitely. Last thing to kind of wrap it up here, what's the trajectory of 2025? What does that look like for Chris? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. One, I've found a lot of people this year that I've spent time around talking about, like, what's their one word that they really focus in on. And for me, it's on execution. You know, I look at that, I'm like, I want to be very disciplined and direct and deliberate with my time. What's most important with my time? Where's it going? Whether it's with my family and my kids, whether it's with my wife, whether it's here working. You know, I look at Legacy and its growth trajectory and where it's headed and what we're doing. We still are absolutely on a rocket ship. It's unreal to watch what we're doing and how we're doing it. It's amazing to see the conversations that we're now in and a part of that we had no business being in 3 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. You know, Roshan, you made the comment, companies continue to pivot. We're not done pivoting, and we've been at this thing 10 years. We did like $450 million last year. So we're an organization that, you know, in the business world would say, that's a sizable organization. We're still pivoting, right? So anybody that doesn't think they need to pivot, they need to maybe rethink that just a little bit. We're still evolving. We're still transforming. We're still growing. We're still trying to figure out how to get better at what we do. But I think that's the point for us, where we're trying to continue to build scar tissue so that when those tough times come, we know how to execute on them. And so 2025 for us is going to very much be a year of stabilization. I believe most solar companies right now need to be focused on stabilizing what they have. I think we're going to find ourselves in a diversification perspective, where we continue to think through where are we pulling money from to fund these accounts for consumers. Who's going to be in it for the long term? Who's not? Who's making good business decisions on that side? Who's not? Where do we want to put our efforts for this year? And ultimately, at the end of the day, like I said, we're still growing different states. We're still growing different sales channels. We still see massive growth being shown through this year, which is super exciting and super fun for us. You know, it's never been more exciting. We are an absolute first look option in our industry for where people want to go to be able to put their time, energy, and effort into delivering a world-class experience for their consumers. That's exciting. I'm like, yes, there's some fun along the way in the solar industry, but there is so much good as long as we stay focused and execute. So this year is going to be about execution. This year is going to be definitely a focus on doing it the right way with the right people. But at the end of the day, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be in a place where we are a first look option that people are excited to be a part of. Awesome. So that's 2025.
Love it. Well, appreciate you being on. Appreciate you sharing all the advice, all the wealth of wisdom here. So you're the man.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, guys. It's fun.